Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have business and life coach, Sara Basloe. Sara, how are you today?
Outstanding. Nice to be here.
Sara, we go way back. We've known each other for just about 10 years. You were my personal business and life coach for close to 4 years, a very meaningful part of my time in my career. And I'm so excited to have you on here because I think a lot of franchise founders, entrepreneurs, they don't understand what a coach does. How could a coach possibly help them when they don't know their industry, and what a meaningful impact that a coach can have. And I thought it was best to bring you on for you to share our experience together and what a coach does and how that differences from a therapist. So with that said, Sara, can you tell me what exactly does a life business coach do?
So a life or business coach or both, what they do is they help a client. What I like to do is I like to say I help clients live fearlessly. So a coach focuses on what's possible, and coaches work with people on their vision of where they want to be in their life, what quality of life they want, how they want their life to be living. It's like a design, a life by design. And so as a coach, you work with clients with setting goals, overcoming any fears or saboteurs or gremlins, developing self-confidence. You know about coaches, and I do like to use the sports analogy. You know, a coach, when somebody's in baseball or basketball or swimming or hiking or whatever it is, when they have a coach, the coach can help them tweak their style so they're more effective and more efficient and have more fun with it. However, a coach really, a big part of coaching is encouraging people that they can do it, because we have so many conversations in our head about how we can't. So many of my clients found themselves as entrepreneurs or owners, founders of companies, found themselves alone, like they were surrounded by people, their spouse or their board of directors or their C-suite or whatever it was. But they wanted to have someone they could talk to be honest with, that they didn't have to filter what they were saying. Oh. And it just, a coach gives a client the space to be real and to be who they need to be, to let go of the things that are not working for them. Mm-hmm. And you asked about the difference between a therapist. So my definition is generally that a coach is someone that works with a client on the future. They look at where they are today and then where they want to be in the future. And then together they fill in that gap to get there. Whereas with therapists, they look at the past and they ask questions like, well, why did that happen? And why was my relationship with this person like that? Coaches will rarely ask a client why. The only time you hear a why is when you're setting a goal. Why do you want this goal? But otherwise, why just it's not part of the conversation.
Right.
Because we're not fixing. Therapy is about fixing someone. Mm-hmm. And coaching is not about fixing. It's about focusing on what your strengths are, what you're best at, and really blowing those up, really making them as strong as possible. Because the things that an owner is not good at, they have a team to help support them. Right. So I think that's a big difference between coaching. Coaching looks at the future and therapy looks at the past.
Yeah, I remember you always telling me when you were my coach, telling me, look, I care about where you are today and where you want to go. And we would talk about the past from time to time, but that was so rare. It was a reference point of why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I remember you would kind of filter that out and just want to talk about, okay, where are we going? Here's where you are today. where you want to go tomorrow, and let's fill in that gap, right?
Because when you hear a negative voice, when anyone hears a negative voice in their head, it's usually a judgment. And it's usually a judgment about the past or a future that hasn't happened. So that is often why in coaching you don't focus on the past, because the past has already happened. You have no control and you can't change that. So it's really about what can you do to make a difference in your life.
Right. Yeah. I know I brought this up to you when you and I first started working together. So for everyone knows, you and I actually met through, let's put it this way, I guess the most famous life coach there is on the planet. We'll just leave it at that. They can figure out who we're talking about. And
yeah,
I remember asking you, like, Sara, how can you possibly help me in my business? I am in franchising and sports. Do you have any background in franchising and sports? And you said no, and it doesn't matter. I would love for you to share with the audience why it doesn't matter for a coach, that they don't need to know the industry and have intimate knowledge about the business that their client is in.
Sure. So there is a saying that 80% of success is psychology and 20% is our mechanics. So when we started working together, I trusted that you knew the mechanics. Like, I didn't have to know the mechanics. I happened to have an MBA. I had been in business for 20, 25 years. So there were some basic foundational things I knew I was confident about and I could count on. And I think that's what happens, is that what I also had been trained in was coaching, was focusing on what was your psychology, what was your emotional state, what was really important that would get you that 80% so you could open up the avenue to that 20% mechanics and success. So I'd say that's probably what it is. I don't have to be, I've worked with realtors, I've worked with fitness facility owners, I've worked with hair salon owners, oh my God, movie producers, just goes on and on. They say to be an expert in an area, you spend 10,000 hours. I haven't spent 10,000 hours. But what I do know is that everyone has to have the right psychology to achieve their goals, their dreams, their hopes, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I would say, as your client, there was actually an advantage for you not to have intimate knowledge about my business or franchising, because it felt like it opened up the kind of questions that you would ask me, and you didn't have any preconceived notions or any judgments about my business, because it wasn't your background. Yeah, you did trust that I understood the mechanics of my business. I never asked you, how do I do this running a sports franchise, or how do I go get more franchisees specifically? But we would talk about, if I want to talk about the growth of the business, you and I would work through some great coaching tools. And I wanted to share, if you would share with the audience, I think some of my favorite coaching tools I wrote down that you helped me with. Number one is annual goal setting. So I understand you've developed this kind of momentum manifesto, so to speak. You and I would do this every year towards the end of the year or the beginning of the year. And it doesn't really matter when you do it. If you haven't done one for this year, do it now. And can we talk about some of the content of this manifesto and some of the things that you would put me through, because it was extremely powerful?
Absolutely. I think the Momentum Manifesto is life-changing, because the reason I say that is that many times people approach the end of the year, and often actually people approach the end of the year and don't plan next year. They just, everybody gets wrapped up in the holidays and they don't have time. They think they don't have time. So what happens is they plan the next year in January, and their plan gets done January 30th, let's say. The challenge with that is you're planning for 12 months, but now you have to do the business in 11. So you really want to plan in December, November, even November. You're making a plan. It's not going to be perfect. It's an estimate. So you could do it in October. There are many corporations that do start the process early.
Sure.
But making this plan with the Momentum Manifesto is giving yourself a map. If you're driving from Florida to Seattle, you're probably not just and you're driving, you're not flying. You're not going to just get on the road and go car go. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to go to this road, or you're going to get it all mapped out. And that's what we really need to do with our goals for the year, because when you're prepared with that, then your decision making is much easier, much clearer. And it just gives you the right triggers to make the right choices. And so the manifesto is kind of interesting. It looks at this year, 2023. It's called Momentum Manifesto 2024, but it looks at 2023. It asks you, what were magical moments in this year?
Mm-hmm.
What was a fabulous experience that you had? What was something, that really worked well? That, Frank, can you think of something that was magical for you this year?
Oh gosh, easily. Starting the podcast was by far the most magical moment because I didn't see it coming.
Right, right. I think that that was truly magical because you're so excited about this. I'm so excited for your
Thank you.
listeners, or viewers, whatever. But so it's those magical moments that you
Mhm.
want to kind of memorialize so that you feel the feelings, see how you made the choice, how it came about. And so it looks at what are magical moments. And then it does have another question in the beginning of the manifesto is, what did you achieve? So it does recognize there's some things that are maybe not magical. However, there's a lot of things you may have achieved in 2023. So
Sure.
you want to look at those. The next thing it does is it looks at what are the things or decisions you made in 2023 that you'd like to repeat so that you can notice a pattern and use that pattern if it's positive. And the next section actually asks you what were the challenges you faced in 2023 and what would you like to not happen again? What are
Mm.
some decisions you would like to not make again? So that the whole manifesto is about awareness. It's really so that you're approaching life with 2 feet on the ground, your eyes open, your heart open,
Hmm.
and being aware of the choices. So often, I think that's why often people we call them New Year's resolutions, and they never happen. It's because they just make them from the top of their head. It's just, a whim.
Right.
And then they forget they've made it. And a year later, it's like, oh, I was going to do that. The manifesto actually takes you through this process of looking at this year, looking at next year, and creating a plan, picking out what your goals are for next year and identifying what's something you could do immediately on those goals, or what are some major actions or steps that you would want to take throughout the year. And like, I'll have clients chunk it down into, you've got this big goal, what are some actions you can do? And now looking at those actions, which ones would you do first? And then in which month would you do them? So it's just a blueprint.
Yeah.
And, as I say to everyone, it's just a blueprint. It's just a blueprint. And if you get to that task and you want to do it or you don't want to do it, that because you've learned something. Remember, every day is different because we learn something about
Hmm.
ourselves or we learn something about our business that now changes the quality of that decision.
Sure.
So it's really taking a look at that. And the manifesto is just brilliant with that. So
Yeah. And the magic of it is that while you were coaching me, it's not like we just set it and forget it. I wrote these goals out and it was done. This was the blueprint that you and I would work through throughout the course of the year. And by chunking down those goals into what I was going to accomplish quarterly, typically we would do a call once a week or every other week. We would have our coaching call. We could then see if we're working towards it. Sometimes I make adjustments. Sometimes I'd have a goal that, something would change and it's not a goal anymore. And it is something that's flexible. This is not concrete that can't be changed, and life changes and you have to pivot. And this gives you the freedom, though, to be able to design your life, like you're saying, and to be able to work towards something and see, because nothing gets done, right, unless it's measured. You've got to measure your goals. And if you have this big, crazy goal, if you don't look at it until the next year, you're never going to get it done. Generally, there's certain actions that need to be taken. And I'm sorry, but there's no way, or not no way, but it is much more difficult to do it by yourself than having a coach that you're working with and working me through, because sometimes fear comes in. I start having some limiting beliefs on why it can't be done. And I have you to challenge me on why, not pushing me and saying, oh, you never once scolded me and said, you didn't do this and you need to do this. Never once did you ever do that. But you would challenge me and ask me, well, maybe why didn't I do something? Do I feel differently about it? What's holding me back? That would probably be the big thing you would say to me, is what's holding me back about it? And I'd be honest with you and be like, well, Sarah's holding me back is I'm scared. of doing this or that, right? I mean, fear comes in. We're all human, we come up with these crazy limiting beliefs on why we can't do something.
Right. Right. It's powerful. You've just gone to, I don't like using the word back because I tell people you're not going back to something. If you want to lose weight, you want to go back to your weight. You don't want to go back to your weight. You want to go to a new weight,
Right.
which is lower than where you are. You're reviewing, reviewing
Yes.
the psychology, 80% psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and having that support of a coach, the accountability partner. I don't know if I told you this. I am getting ready. I'm preparing to hike to Mount Everest Base Camp.
No way.
I am in May of 2024. So I'm crossing my fingers. I'm
Oh
making the
my gosh.
plans. However, I am working out with two other people, and it makes a big difference. I did a 3-hour hike today, this morning, and all uphill. The elevation was amazing. When I have to show up for other people because I'm supporting them, they're supporting me,
Oh,
but so it's the same thing with a coach. I have a coach. I don't have a sports coach right now,
right.
although I'm working a fitness plan, but I have a coach that
Mm-hmm.
works with me on my business and also these other personal goals. But it's so you're not out there alone. It's
Sure.
like my husband is just the best thing since sliced bread. I love him. He's fabulous. However, he just can't hold me accountable. That puts a
Mm-hmm.
pressure on the relationship that's not fair.
Sure.
Yeah, like you were saying in the beginning of the call, a conversation that it's so amazing to have a coach to share the most of the conversation's positive, but there are some things you just want to say, I can't do that. I got out today. I didn't want to do that. Or,
Sure.
I've got this technology challenge and I just don't feel like doing it, and okay. So change your focus,
Yeah.
change your language,
Yeah. Yeah. We get in our heads sometimes. The saying that I've always heard that the reason why we need a coach, anybody needs a coach. So somebody who is the greatest baseball hitter or the greatest golfer, the reason why they need a coach is because they can't see themselves swing. I can't see
Right.
myself. I'm living it, internally. And that's where the coach differs. So nobody is immune to not needing some sort of coaching. I want to hit on a second tool that you used with me. I almost said on me, but used with me that I love. And I know that it's a resource by many coaches, and that's the Wheel of Life, I think it's called.
You'll get different names. Wheel of Life, Balance Wheel.
Mm-hmm.
It can vary, but it's just one of the best ever tools because the Wheel of Life or the Balance Wheel, however you want, it can have 8 or 10 areas of life. And I used this a lot at the beginning of this year. I mean, I used it a lot all the time, but it was just I went through a transition from 2022 to 2023. And, that's the other thing about coaching is we talk about identity. Who are you? Who do you want to be? And so I used the Wheel of Life and I said, in this transition, who do I want to be in a year from now? And the Wheel of Life, some of the categories are career, finance, family, health and fitness, community service, fun and recreation. There's a couple others that I think I left out. There's usually 8 or 10 categories. And what I did, which I would, encourage your listeners and you
Mm-hmm.
at any point, generally it's a great way to measure where you are personally at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the year on a scale of 1 to 10.
Okay.
So, for instance, like I'll use health and fitness because I was talking about Mount Everest. So, where I was honestly on a scale of 1 to 10, January 1st I was probably about a 3,
Okay.
and I love working and I've always been athletic and, healthy. So I've never felt this real drive about health and fitness, but I rated all of these things on my Wheel of Life between 1 to 10. And I got to see where everything fell. And then
Mm-hmm.
I did another column and I said, where do I want them to be? And so the ones that I wanted to have be higher, there were 3 of them. I chose career, financial, health, and fitness. And those are the ones I focused on this year. Most brains can focus on 3 things at a time. And I would encourage anyone to use this balance wheel. And if somebody wants a copy of it, just email me. I think Frank's going to put my email up, but
Yes.
It's a great tool, Frank. It really is.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because you're plotting each thing 1 to 10, you quickly see that the wheel is never balanced, and you can't roll a
Never.
wheel down the street if it's not well balanced, right?
At one point in my career as a coach, I used to feel that balance for one person was not necessarily balanced for another. Like it didn't have to be a wheel that
Hmm.
rolled down the street, like you were saying. And I've changed that because it's the standard that we hold ourselves at. If, like, I was a 2 in health and fitness, but I wanted to be, an 8 or 9, like that 8 or 9 is what I say is an 8 or 9. So
Right.
it's the idea is all of the areas that you're rating are at your best, not at somebody else's best.
Hmm.
So I think I really believe the wheel needs to be a wheel. So yeah.
Yes, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a great tool, and I know we used to use it from time to time. Sometimes you would bring it up like, I think we need to do the wheel again, and kind of almost like a check-in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we'll get that out to folks that are interested.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great tool because it helps you, as you said, it's a great check in
Hmm.
and it helps you stay focused. So I had these 3 areas: career, financial, health, and fitness this year. If I was doing fun and recreation, then I wasn't doing one of those 3 areas. So it really helps determine where your focus is, what are the actions you're going to take. If you're taking an action that is, I don't know, let's say there's another piece in the wheel called physical environment.
Hmm.
And if I started doing things on my physical environment when my physical environment is a 9 already, it was a distraction from doing my career or financial.
Sure.
So it helps you focus. Yeah.
Hmm.
So will you do a wheel?
Sure, I'll do a
Now
wheel.
it's okay. Now we're at the end of the year.
Okay.
Will you do a wheel?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely, I'm going to do
Fabulous.
it.
Okay.
The other thing we did together that I thought was so meaningful is, like I said, we would do our calls either weekly or every other week. And
Right.
we never left a coaching session without some sort of weekly or some sort of accountability where you would have me fill out, I think you called it like a prep sheet, I think it was my call
Yep.
prep sheet. And I had to
Here.
submit it to you before, like a day or two before our call. I wanted to know if some of the components of the accountability, it wasn't like, just did you do this? Would you share with the audience the meaning and some of the content of that weekly accountability? Like what were you looking for before you had that call with me?
Okay. That's beautiful. I love that. I love that. Coaching call planning form.
Oh yeah.
And the first question is, what are you listening to? Because if someone is listening to things that are negative, then that's where their focus is. So it becomes, what are you listening to or what are you reading? Okay. We're going to fill our brains with information. You want to be in control of what you're filling it with, not at the mercy of what you happen to see, right?
Right.
And then it says, what are your goals for the next 90 days? So we would work together on a quarterly
Mm-hmm.
basis. And by writing them down every week, it conditions them into your brain, it anchors them in so that again, you're focusing on them. If you're thinking about your goals, you're not thinking about taking an action on something that's not going to get you to your goals. So it's writing your goals. I would suggest people read their goals at least minimum 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
You can read them every day, but you don't have to read all the actions you're going to take to do it, but just your goals. So your brain actually works on there's that gentleman named Keith Cunningham.
Of course. I've been to many of Keith's conferences, of his
You
workshops.
have been.
Oh, yeah. The 4-day
He is,
MBA and buying or
ah,
selling a business and plan or get slaughtered.
yes, he's brilliant. And one of the things that he talks about is think time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that? Where you take an hour, I want to say it's 1 hour a week, where you put yourself in a room that is not your office, and you bring a pad in, and you just sit there. You can go in with a question you want to answer.
Mm-hmm.
However, you're not there to make notes about everything you have to do for the next week. It's just letting your brain take the time to think.
Mm-hmm.
And have you done that?
I
Is
have,
that
I have, and I would never be able to tell the story like the way Keith says it, of course, because Keith is just incredible. But Keith told us
yeah.
he learned the thinking time from the junk bond king Michael Milken, And Keith
Oh,
was,
really?
so back in the 80s, Keith was sitting next to Michael Milken during a big meeting. And
Uh-huh.
Michael was asked a question on when can we look at this? And he opens up his little day timer and goes, I need to see when I'm going to be thinking again. And he says, I'm going to be thinking again on Wednesday at like 1 a.m. So that's when I'll get back to you the next morning. I just kind of paraphrasing, but yeah, the thinking time though is masterful because most of us don't schedule how we're going to plan or thinking about something that's important.
Right. It's amazing. That's why I suggest in our coaching prep form, coaching planning form, prepare
Mhm.
your, plan your coaching call form is to reread your goals all the time because it starts your brain thinking.
Yes.
The next question is, what are the actions you committed to? So often coaches will say, oh, my client didn't do this. They forgot they even committed to it. So it's really important to be clear what they committed to. And so the question is, what were the actions you committed to? And then the next question is, what are the actions did you take? Because sometimes that's different than what you committed to. And there's a lesson in there. I find that sometimes when I'm working with new clients, that they will either overcommit, like, oh, Sarah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, da, 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 da. And then they're overwhelmed and they have a tendency to then almost do nothing because
Right.
it's just too much. And then the other type of client is someone who commits to one thing, not that much. They're confident. They want to know they're going to get that one thing done. So they only commit to one thing. But then coaching ends up being boring.
Mm.
They're not challenged and they're not really moving forward. So it's really a dance about figuring out with that question, those two questions, what do you commit to and what did you get done, is a dance of what's the right balance for the client so that they have enough to do but not too much to do. And then the next question is, so in your experience of getting the actions done, I'm paraphrasing this,
Mhm.
what did you learn or what was a benefit? So that it's always about looking at when you take an action. So what I like to say in coaching, we say action, learning, action, learning. So from every action you take, you learn something.
Mhm.
And from your learning, it triggers you to take another action. And then you take an action. And that's why when people go to conferences, do training programs, like all the big names, Brian Tracy or Jim Rohn or Tony Robbins, whoever does those training programs, the reason you can do them over and over again is because if you went to something in, say, June of 2022, and now it's December of 2023, you're a different person. And so when you do a program over and over again, it's not saying you didn't get it. It's saying, okay, now I'm new. I'm looking at things from a different perspective. I've got different lenses on.
Totally.
So that question about what did you learn, what were some benefits from the actions you took is really important. Let's see, after that, it's like, well, what did you want to focus on in this call? So if someone has a challenge during the week, or something a challenge probably says it all, a
Uh-huh.
conflict or something something they want to celebrate. Coaching is not about fixing. So it's not always like you're looking for something negative. I will work with clients because of our perspective and our work together. Often the coaching call is about, well, I did this and this is what I learned. And then we celebrate it. And how could I do it maybe even a little more different and what
Mhm.
could be more benefits? So often that question is, what is it you want to focus on? And quite honestly, some clients will come to a call with, I was trying to make this decision. Can we brainstorm so I can get a different perspective? So often that's what
I
happens.
did that often.
Yeah.
It was often
Yeah.
brainstorming, but I know that last question was something along the lines of, what do you want to get out of this call?
Right.
That last question would make me pause. I was going great until I got to that very last one. Every single time I had to submit that prep sheet to you, what do I want to get out of this call? Oh my gosh.
Right.
You can kind of weenie out and say, I
Right.
want to brainstorm. But sometimes you had to brainstorm, but sometimes you were kind of weaning out, like, I didn't really want to I got to be pushed to really facing whatever the challenge is. And you would sniff it out though.
Yeah, totally, totally, totally. But one of the things I've added to my work with what I want to call VIP clients that we didn't do, Frank, is if someone has a question that needs answering like that day, and they just want somebody to talk about with it, they don't want to wait a week or 2 weeks. I do a 15-minute, I want to say pivot appointment, or I don't like to use the language crisis because then you attract crisis, but they're just 15-minute check-ins or 15-minute adjustment appointments. And people have really liked that. They don't need it all the time, but it's just something came up at work or something came up with their spouse or their kids, and they just want 15 minutes to say, this is what happened. This is how I'm looking at it. What's another way of looking at it? So it's that same question, but we get to expand on it more frequently.
Sure. So. Just for the audience so they understand, this weekly accountability, just think of it as the most detailed version of that momentum manifesto, right? Because you're backing out, you go from the weekly accountability and looking at your goals to that, or I should say the chunk down goals, and then you're backing out. So it's just a subset. What I would do is on my iPhone, I had in notes, I had basically 3 categories. The 3 categories were for the year, places I wanted to go or things I wanted to see was one. The second one was things I wanted to learn. And the third was things I wanted to achieve. That was sort of my dream list. I called it dream list. I never want to call it a bucket list, but that's really what it was. I call it the dream list. And it was those goals that you and I would say were aligned for the year. And I would put, of course, deadlines on when I wanted to, either see these things or learn something or achieve something. And by reviewing it, the key, like you said earlier, I can't overstate this enough, looking at these things like 3 times a week. It would be almost every day that I would look at notes and review it. Maybe I would make a little tweak to it. I didn't want to change the dates on. I wanted to kind of stay to it. But it really allowed me to keep it front and center. Because if you do this momentum manifesto and you put it in a file cabinet or you save it on your hard drive and you don't look at it again, it is useless. Like you're going to get none of it done. So I took like a subset of that and kept that on my iPhone and notes and just looked at it. But I think the weekly accountability, that's how the goals were all achieved in working with you. So
what you're saying, Frank, is brilliant. I love the way you organized it for your brain, your psychology. I mean, it was brilliant. And then, you came to coaching calls knowing what you wanted to work on, or we figured it out.
Yeah.
And then the next question was, so what do you want to do for the next week? What are the actions you want to take for your goals? And I also added a question. I don't know that you had that question. It was like, what is the progress you've made towards your goals, towards your 90-day goals since we last talked? So I added that at the bottom of the thing. But it is important at the end of the session to know what it is you're committing to, because that's got to go on the top of the next report, right? The next report.
So Sarah, I want to segue for a moment. I know I've told you this before, but I'm going to tell you again publicly. You were one of the most influential people during my career running I-9 Sports. You helped me through some really, really dark days, and I needed a coach. You were there for me. You were not easy on me. You never let me off the hook. It was one day I came to you on our call. Maybe it was back in like 2014. And other than my wife, I told nobody, other than Nadine, to say to you, I think it might be time for me to move on from the company. And the process that you helped me through, okay, first of all, it took a long time. Because I was very unsure, and it was a huge decision because I thought my company was my purpose in life. And as I look back on some of my notes, I look back on my coaching session notes recently, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we talked about that for as long as we did. But it was a huge, huge decision. Do you recall what it was like some of the things that maybe went on? I want to get it from your perspective as the coach, what you recall and me going through that.
It was a very big decision. I-9 had been one of your children, and you'd been in it for a very long time. I think I remember there were emotional pieces of feeling guilty. How could I go somewhere else? And what will this mean to Nadine? What will this mean to my team at I-9? You had invested so much time in building your team and a fabulous team. So I remember that it was a long time because, well, how many years were you in I-9?
Well, technically, I started developing the franchise in 2001. So our conversation really was like in 2014, we started talking about it. But my gosh, if I, based on the amount of time I put in, it was probably 30 years I squeezed into 15.
Right. Well, so sometimes I like to compare that time. It took you 13 or 20 years to get to where you were.
Mhm.
It doesn't unravel overnight. You don't just, it's like pulling a tooth. You wouldn't, extract it out of your life. It's a process. It's a transition. And it's not just impacting you, it's
Mhm.
impacting everyone around you. It was intentional. It was very intentional. And the letter, remember, I know we talked
Okay. Okay.
the letter.
I want to preface this by, I just want to share with the audience how this whole thing came to be. You and I had worked together, week after week. And the big question was, should I stay or should I go? Should I consider selling it? And my heart was completely torn. I'll tell you, it's the one thing in my business that when I went home, obviously talked to my wife about it, is the only decision that my wife said to me, I can't help you with this. This is the one decision you're going to need to make on your own because you're going to have to live with it. And I felt like it was always a challenge. And I would say that every time you gave me the weekly accountability of you would give me homework, I always did it, except for one day you said to me, I want you to write, and this sounded very, very innocent. You said, Frank, I want you to write a love letter to your business. And I was like, okay. And the next coaching session we had, I didn't do it. And you asked me, did I do it? I said, why not? And I said, I couldn't bring myself to doing it. And then you said, will you do it next time we talk? And I said, yes. And then the next time we talked, I didn't do it. And I think you were picking up on that I wasn't ready to write it. Right. Sara, I didn't know what the love letter was going to look like. I couldn't even get myself to writing it. I want to share the contents with the audience, but I would love for you first to start out with the love letter. Like, what made you think for me to do this? How did that whole thing come to be? What were you hoping that I was going to get out of this homework assignment?
Well, so whatever we do in life, we have a vision of where it's going to go, whether it's a relationship with a loved one, or it's a business or a job or whatever it might be, and whether it's even short term or long term, but there's always a vision of what will be the end result. And so what happens is, when we make that change, it's like losing a good friend or a parent or someone to death, because they're no longer in your life. And so that consistent connection and emotion that you have with someone or something is now gone. And it's really grieving. So it's really hard to let go of something. I like to say divorce is a terrible thing, and it takes so much courage to leave someone. Things have to be really bad for someone to leave because it breaks the vision that they had. All of a sudden, it's gone. And so it wasn't as negative for you with I-9, with your business. However, it was emotionally, you were ready. You wouldn't have even brought it up if that wasn't a consideration. Or, I think in our lives, we actually come to different pivot points in our lives where we get these signals that it's time to make a change. And so you were getting signals that it was time to make a change. So the letter is a way of having a conversation. It's almost like with another entity.
Yes.
You said you're going to read it, but you're having a conversation with this other entity, and you're saying, these were all the wonderful things that I experienced with you. And now it's time to change. Now it's time to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way of trying to sever that emotional connection so that you can start healing. In our hearts, we have places, good chambers, if you want
Right.
to call it, where your parents are, where your kids are, where your your friends, your colleagues, whoever it might be. And now you're closing that, like you're kind of closing the door and locking it.
Sure.
And so that's what happens with this letter. It helps emotionally to separate without feeling guilty. It's the part of the process.
Yeah. So I was 15 years in, and what was confusing for me, Sara, is that in my brain, I had achieved everything I wanted. Like my dream was achieved. My dream was fulfilled. I felt like I accomplished everything. I feel like I took everything as far as I wanted to, but my heart was telling me, how dare you? How dare you leave the people who you care about, that care about you? You came from nothing. You worked hard. You almost went out of business. You broke through. You made all the changes. Look what this business has given you. And now you're going to potentially stop doing it. Like, I thought it was my life's purpose. I didn't realize, looking back now, it was a mission in life. And I believe that our purpose in life is to be fulfilled, to, use our gifts, and our life is made up of several missions. So when I was doing my softball league before I9 Sports, oh my gosh, I thought I was never going to stop doing that. I loved it. But I realized that was a mission that led to I9 Sports. And heck, maybe I needed to do I9 Sports to lead to this and whatever's coming next. I didn't see it that way. So I want to paraphrase about the love letter. So I want to tell you what happened and share with the audience. So I had enough that I wasn't doing this love letter, but I did table it for a while. This went on for a few months. You didn't know, and I didn't know when I was going to do it. And it was in 2015. I woke up one morning and I felt something different. And I immediately went to my office, my home office, and I said, "Dear I9 Sports." I had no idea what I was going to write. It was early in the morning. Everyone was still sleeping at home. It was dark out. And I just started typing what I felt. And I started writing, I'll paraphrase, writing something along the lines of, we started together. We started from nothing. Nobody believed in us, or very few people believed in us. We worked hard. We almost went out of business. We hired for our weakness. We made changes. We battled through. We got through the recession. And I wrote this letter that I thought was so endearing to this company that I love so much. And then I wrote, "But I think that we need to go separate ways. I think you're more than me and I'm more than you. And I think I've taken you as far as I'm supposed to take you." And it turned into a breakup letter.
Yeah.
And I had no intentions of writing a breakup letter before I started writing Dear I9 Sports. I had no idea. And when I typed that letter up and I looked at it, it just felt right. And on the next coaching call, which you didn't know was coming, I said, "Sara, I wrote the love letter and I'm breaking up." It was extremely powerful. It gave me clarity that I didn't have.
Yeah. What were the emotions you felt after writing that?
For the first time, it felt right. I felt like I was doing the right thing. I felt like I had taken my company as far as I was supposed to take it. I felt like my dream was fulfilled. I did everything I was supposed to. And maybe what I did was I filtered out all of what I thought other people would think about the decision. Because it was just about, I thought I was doing what was right for me and for my family. There was no reason to sell the company. The company it was exploding. Every year we were growing, 20%, 30%. Like there was no reason to sell something. Like, why would you sell something that's going so well? It wasn't a matter of it going well or not going well. It was internally, I was no longer the two things. If we talk about like we have needs as humans, I think personally, I wasn't growing anymore and I wasn't contributing anymore. I had a phenomenal team that was doing everything. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast about growing and contribution. Those are my two biggest needs, right? And those are kind of needs of the spirit. We've heard this before from, for folks that business is a spiritual game. And I believe that. And for me, it was time. And it wasn't like, after the love letter, it wasn't like that was it, the heavens opened up and it was perfect. It wasn't that it was a perfect transition after that, but it was the door, like you use that analogy, it was the door now was closing behind me. I understood I was at peace for the first time in my decision. And now there was no turning back because the love letter was what it was. And it was the truth.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's so important is the emotion of peace, and being in your own truth. And you were ready.
Yeah.
You were ready.
And then I had to tell the people, I had to tell the people that I cared about in the company. And of course that was difficult.
I remember that. There were a number of sessions we spent on that.
We
Yeah,
did.
it process. It's and you pivoted, you were getting messages that I love the way you said, I-9, you're bigger than I am, and I'm bigger than you are.
Mhm.
And like that it was time to just go different ways. Here you are. Look at what you're doing now. It's so exciting, helping, making a difference in other franchise owners' lives,
Mhm.
changing how they look at things. It's your podcasts have been excellent.
Aw, thank you. You know what the love letter really did for me and the decision is I finally made the break in my identity crisis. The identity crisis
Right.
is that me and I9 Sports were one. And I know there's people listening to this episode that they think that they and their company are one and the same. And when you have that identity crisis, which is so common, like, I don't know, like every entrepreneur has that experience. But if you want real growth and real development, not just personally, but professionally, and you want your company to
Right.
explode, it's when you separate yourself from your business, because then it's almost like taking blinders off. You start making the right hires for the company. You start
Right.
developing even better systems and processes, and you start having a more fulfilling life because now you're starting to put an emphasis on the personal side of your life, on what you want to do, what you want to achieve that's maybe different or bigger than just this business. Like, so intertwined, it's dangerous to have that intertwined identity crisis.
And as you said, Frank, when people start a business, it is you. I mean, if it's not you, then who is it? But however, you had taken it to a place where now it was really significant, and it was time for you to be able to use those skills again. You were brilliant in your business, building this incredible team, the vision, the franchise, the other, you were working with the other franchisees,
Mhm.
you knew there was something else.
Oh,
So
thank you.
it was just a process. It does take months. It does take months. And I hope you're proud of the process that you went through, because that's what it takes.
Yeah, I do reflect on it quite a bit still to this day. And it was quite the process, but after going through it, and I don't want to have to get into so much about after the exit, but nobody prepares you for life after exit. And I went through, truthfully, kind of feeling a period of very blue, because after you get paid, so to speak, you realize you were never doing it just strictly for the money. I knew I wasn't doing it strictly for the money anyway.
Right.
That's not what motivated me, but you realize that
Right.
all of a sudden my needs weren't still being met. And I think it's a great segue to ask you, one of the things you used to tell me is to watch my language. And it wasn't that I said something offensive, but remember you would say to me, is that true? What are you saying? Can we talk about spa?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is such a great segue, because it is like your letter was allowing you to be even more than you could be, and it's like that. And so, it's a great segue. You're right. If anyone notices their language and how they say things, it really is giving a message to your brain. And we say things over and over again. And I've got an example. I remember going into the bank, and the gentleman in front of me, it was his turn, and he went up to the teller and he said to the bank person, the woman, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Not bad." I thought, oh my God, not bad. So every day, if 10 people ask her, she's hearing bad, bad, bad all the
Mm-hmm.
time. And I thought to myself, she could have said, "I'm doing pretty good."
Right.
And, so it's really about the things we say to other people, but the real intense part is the things we say to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the spa, and it's a three-piece exercise. It's an acronym. S stands for self-talk. So what are you saying to yourself? The P stands for what your posture is. So often we'll see things on the news or personal growth things where you see
The
Superman,
Superman
or
pose.
Superwoman,
Yes.
yes. And so it's your posture. And, if somebody's walking around with their shoulders rounded and their head down, that triggers negative self-talk. You're not open, you're not getting positive energy, you're definitely not getting actually enough air and oxygen.
Right.
So it's your posture. You want to watch that. And Then the last piece is it's awareness. And that is what you focus on. You can be walking down a street. I'll use that as an analogy, but metaphor is walking down the street, you see a lot of garbage. You think, oh, this is terrible. This place is terrible. Or you can walk down the street and look up, and see the people coming to you and maybe some smiling faces, or you see somebody who you really admire. It's the same exact time, place, everything. It's just what you focus on. Mm-hmm. And the same thing in business. And we say what you focus on is what you get.
Right.
Where you focus on, your energy flows, something like that.
Yeah.
What you focus on is what you get. So when someone focuses on the languaging the issues in their business as being, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. It's so difficult. It's so hard. Oh. That's what you create. And that's what you attract. When you were growing I9, there were definitely hurdles. Every business has it,
Oh, yeah.
That's why I like to call what I do mental fitness. Is there's always hurdles that we're working to get over. It's just how you perceive them. And so in business, when there's, I don't know, you've got to talk to your accountant, or you have to talk to your operations person, or whoever it might be, that you're focusing on the things that are going wrong. But it's, if you talk about those things from a perspective of like, well, how can we change this? What can we learn from this?
Mm-hmm.
It's that whole piece again.
Yes.
That it changes how you see the business. It changes how the other person sees the business. So that whole spa is really a really valuable thing to remember, and a great tool is noticing your self-talk, how you're taking care of your body. Like, I love alcohol, but I don't drink because it doesn't help my health,
Right.
but it's your body and your focus. Those three things are amazing. So when anyone gets to pay attention to those things and just live their life in the notion of what they're saying to themselves, how they're holding their body, and what they're focusing on, it's life-changing.
Yeah.
Life-changing.
You know what I started doing in March of 2023? I felt like I was telling my daughter that if I look back at some of my old journaling, I noticed that I always journaled when I was like in the most reflective mood, and usually reflective when things aren't going great. And I said to my daughter, I was like, my gosh, if I look back at some of my journals, you would think like things weren't always going well, because I only wrote when things weren't going well, right? So I made a conscious effort in March of 23 that as much as I wanted to journal, I found myself hard time getting started. I started writing title on my iPhone every morning. First thing I woke up, I would write 3 things that I'm grateful / excited for today. Excellent. Just 3 things. Some days it would repeat. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my health and vitality. I'm grateful for the abundance that we have in our lives and freedom to be able to do what we want when we want. And maybe I wrote those same things, but what would happen, Sara, is that I realized I was creating a new pattern. I was creating a new pattern that every morning I was forcing myself to be grateful, to be reflective on what I was grateful for and excited. And then here's what happened. I started by just writing those 3 little bullet points. And before you know it, I wrote a paragraph of what happened yesterday. And then I would write the 3 things I'm grateful / excited for today. The next day, I found myself writing 2 paragraphs and 3 things I'm grateful for / excited for today. And before you know it, I was journaling sort of what I was experiencing as a result. And as I'm sure you're probably not surprised, life changed for me dramatically in 2023, I think as a result of really being grateful and excited for something, because it was what I focused on and is what I was saying to myself every day. And I'm sure physically I was moving. I was putting myself in a peak physical state while I was doing this. And it would be first thing in the morning. I could look back on throughout 2023, I think I missed maybe 5 or 6 days total. Other than that, I was consistent almost every single day I did it, except for like 5 or 6 days. And I encourage anybody, if you want to journal and you thought about it, it just sounds too intimidating to do every day. Start out with just the 3 things. What are you grateful / excited for today? That's it. Just 3 lines. And let's see what happens tomorrow. And it's amazing the momentum that I think you get from it.
That is awesome. I hope everybody listening to this will do what Frank did. It really makes a difference. It's life-changing. Look at look at how it's taken you in a certain direction and your perspective on life. What would you tell your listeners about that experience?
What I would tell my listeners about it is that what it has done is it actually created an opening in my brain for new experiences and for new challenges. So is it a coincidence that a month after I started doing this, that the idea of a podcast came to be? Now, granted, I didn't force myself, but I found myself at a business conference in San Diego where a stranger came up to me and we talked about franchising. He was like, dude, you need to do a podcast. I would not have gone to that business conference if I wasn't already feeling great and I was just feeling encouraged about the growth of the future. So is it a coincidence that a month after I started doing this, the idea of the podcast? But here's what's happened. Now, all of a sudden, my goals have changed. And I'm pretty sure we're going to go way beyond a podcast in the future. But right now, here's what I'm doing, Sarah. I think you would appreciate this as my coach, is that I have no expectation. I am literally appreciating what I'm doing. And as a former type A individual that as a crazy entrepreneur that I've been in the years, I've grown. I'm not the same person. I'm actually much more reflective. I'm much more appreciating where I am today. And I'm being much more patient with myself. I'm more forgiving of myself. And I have no expectations on this podcast on viewership and audience. I don't care where the numbers go. It doesn't matter to me. I'm having a great time and hopefully impacting others. Whereas the Frank from 10 years ago would have been all about setting milestones. I need this many subscribers on YouTube by this date and this many viewers. I don't even think about it. And hopefully people will be inspired by just being and having fun and doing something you enjoy. Because I think magic happens when you're really just enjoying yourself. I know that worked for me throughout my career. I am where I am because I had fun what I was doing.
Well, we talked in an earlier conversation how important contribution and growth are to you. And your podcast is something you've never done before. And it's a huge contribution to people in not just your industry, but of course your industry, but just people learning, hearing what it's like to be an entrepreneur and be a successful entrepreneur, growing a business. I don't know any entrepreneur that sits down and says, oh, I don't want to be successful. And you're a great role model because you were so successful. It's very exciting.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Sarah, we can go on and on. I could talk to you for another hour easily about everything, but I don't want to take up much more of your time. I would love for you to share out, if you're open to sharing the Momentum Manifesto with people or possibly taking on a coaching client. I don't know your availability. I know that you're very busy with clients already, but if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how could they find out more info?
I would love it. So they can actually email me at sarah@interactivecoaching.us. And I would be happy to send you the Momentum Manifesto for 2024. And when you're done with it, set up an appointment with me to debrief it so that you know what really stands out for you and what is your focus, where you want to go. And we'll certainly hear your language in that conversation. So I'd be happy to debrief. And as Frank said, I do have just a few spots for coaching clients to see if we're a fit. And if we're not, I would encourage you to have a coach. And as you may well imagine, I know a lot of very outstanding coaches. So if we're not a fit, I'm always happy to make a referral. So happy to help anyone with getting 2024 started and making it your best year yet. Every year is the best year yet.
I agree.
I
agree.
Yeah.
Sarah, I am so grateful for you. Thank you so much for everything. Like I said, you've been a huge influence on my life. You made the biggest difference during the most difficult times of my career. And I just want to thank you. And thank you for being on the podcast and willing to share. And I hope everybody enjoyed the transparency because I think we kind of we let it fly today. We shared everything. So I hope it was impactful for those that watched and listened today. So thank you again.
I hope so too. And oh my gosh, thank you for this opportunity. This is the first podcast I've been on. And it was really, I think the most important thing for me was we got to connect and contribute to other people's lives. And it's been so much fun.
That's it.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.